All right, Tom Hopper, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
This morning, so far, I've had a coffee and then some exogenous ketones that you gave me.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's it. So I'm fasting right now.
So what does a normal day of eating look like for you? What's your kind of pattern? What are some of the foods that you would say are your go-tos? Because you're in awesome shape year-round for your roles, just in life in general. I've known you for a little while. I mean, you're always lean, you're always shredded, you're always on some expedition to change your body in one way or another, which is awesome. What does a day of eating look like for you?
Well, like you say, like it varies, right? Depending on what the role is I'm doing. If I'm like what would you call like an off season, like I'm at home with the kids and just playing around with them and I'm not actually working on anything right now. So right now I'm in the middle of shooting. So for me, I'm in a bit what you call a maintenance phase, right? So I do everything I can to keep my calories to a point where I can maintain the shape I'm currently on. So I eat when I'm hungry. Right now, the way I feel is like I don't try and eat to excess. I eat when I'm hungry and I eat what I want. And day to day, I don't eat any processed foods. Occasionally, I'll eat minimally processed foods, which not everyone includes whey protein in that, but whey protein is a processed food ultimately. So I'll have whey protein occasionally, but generally, I'll eat. Right now I'm on more of an animal-based diet, so I'm eating a lot of steak, a lot of ground beef, but I'll have a lot of avocado, and then occasionally I'll incorporate, if I want to go back into more carbs, I'll incorporate a lot of fruit, sweet potato, root vegetables, beetroot. So right now I'm probably more in a keto phase. So I'm having much higher fats, embracing the fats in meat, but still incorporating the fruits like avocado to get my fats in there as well.
After today's video, I put a link for our sponsor, LMNT Electrolytes. And in case you haven't seen it, they have a new sparkling version in a can. So it's a sparkling electrolyte, 1,000 milligrams sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, 60 milligrams magnesium with 0 calories. Amazing if you're on a diet, amazing if you're fasting, amazing if you're working out. And of course, they still have their normal stick packs too. Those are my general go-to. But the sparkling is nice because it's almost like I feel like I'm having a soda, but it's got something in it that I could use, especially if I'm active. So when I'm cutting calories, having electrolytes like really just kills the appetite a little bit. It makes me feel like I'm getting something and I don't feel like I need to go somewhere else for it. Anyhow, the link down below gets you a free variety pack of LMNT stick packs with any purchase. So grapefruit salt, you can get the watermelon salt, the citrus salt, the mango chili, the chocolate salt, all the really good flavors that they have that have pretty much no calories. So again, that link is down below, drinklmnt.com/Thomas, drinklmnt.com/Thomas for that free sample variety pack with purchase.
So right now, if I put you on the spot, if you could pick 5 foods to bring to a desert island, what would you bring?
Eggs, number one. It's nature's multivitamin, nature's protein bar. I love them. So versatile. Probably avocados, butter. Okay. So we're on 3 there. Grass-fed beef, mince, like ground beef. And then what else? What else we got? I'd probably bring some exogenous ketones, something like that, or MCT, or something that's going to give me lots of brain energy and keep me going, and like good high quality fats.
So you're planning on being on this desert island for a while?
For a while, yeah, exactly.
Keep yourself satiated.
Yeah.
All right, now, like follow-up question to that: if carbs are in the equation, what would you say your 5 go-to carbohydrates are?
Definitely sweet potato. Like I chow down on that stuff. For me, it gives me really good sustained energy. I feel it's very clean. I don't get any kind of high blood sugar spikes on that. Fruits, I feel great on berries. Definitely blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, apples, kiwi, golden kiwi specifically, I feel is great. Mango.
That's my go-to.
Yeah, it's great.
You eat the peel?
Yeah, the whole thing, man. The whole thing. Get the fiber in there. So yeah, like I do a lot of trial and error with things like fruits and various different vegetables. Beetroot, I think, is a great one. Definitely post-workout, beetroot seems to be good for me. It replenishes glycogen stores when I'm eating more carbs.
So one of the things that I always find interesting, I mean, obviously, you're having to balance a couple of things. You're having to stay in phenomenal shape. You're also having to be cognitively switched on, for recall and for dialogue, for everything when it comes down to acting. Are there any foods that you've noticed that completely sabotage that for you? You've got people that can just plow through anything. Maybe they're not as aware of their body, or they're aware of the brain fog they might get. I mean, are there any foods that you notice, okay, when I eat that, I do not perform on set, I can't think clearly?
Yeah, we've talked about this, right? Like in terms of certain carbohydrates, I find you don't know until you come off them that you go, oh, that was not good for me. Yeah. And I've found recently that like oatmeal, if I have it every now and again, it can be really beneficial, right? But then sometimes when you have something where you go, oh, I feel great on that today, you keep doing it because you felt great yesterday. But I've actually found that like a buildup of certain things, and oatmeal being one of these, if I have too much oatmeal, I find that I start to feel sluggish and almost like I've had a crash afterwards. I feel quite sluggish, or I get brain fog. But if I have it like every now and again, I get a benefit from it. So I think that's a thing for me of learning to be really in tune with my body, is going, what is good to utilize every now and again, and what should be a staple every day. And I actually found that meat in general, like higher protein, higher quality fats, they're my staple. They're the things that I just function well on all the time, year round. And actually, I'm finding that those kind of carbohydrates is things that I can utilize when I need to get maybe big, because I find it harder to get a lot of size on in a more ketogenic state. I find it much easier to put on size with higher carb, and you know this, like you can explode if you just up your carbs, but I don't feel as good up here. Yeah. So that's the trade-off, I suppose.
You become the quintessential meathead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it feels like. Sluggish and just kind of do. I feel like Luther in Umbrella Academy.
You're just like, maybe that's the right idea.
Which, ironically, I'm on higher carbs when I'm doing Luther most of the time. So
it's interesting. Dr. Mike Isertel, when he was on the channel, you know Dr. Mike?
Yeah.
When we were talking about carbohydrates and building muscle, the thing that he, the evidence behind carbohydrates and actual muscle building is it's not as strong as people think, right? Like carbohydrates aren't a prerequisite to build muscle. But one of the things that he mentioned that's so true is they allow you to eat more. Like when you eat carbohydrates, he's like, it's a great appetite stimulant. And I never thought of it like that until he said that. Because everyone thinks there's just like this magical thing that happens with insulin and muscle building. And to a certain degree there is, but it's not that you can't build muscle on a lower carb diet.
Sure.
It just becomes easier with carbohydrates because A, you're having additional fuel coming in, but also the stimulatory effect that you get from in terms of appetite. You get the stimulation that comes.
And your muscles are fuller, right? Because of the water.
So you might have more internal leverage just as a result of that. Like the intracellular leverage that can happen. Like if your muscle bellies are full, you literally have a stronger lever arm that can pull more weight. So
interesting.
There is that working to your advantage, but it also comes at a potential trade-off of an inflammatory effect, or however someone independently responds to that.
That's so true. Like the inflammatory effect, like I've found that when I'm on lower carbs, like, I've had shoulder issues and like I've worked on them, and you get like that. I know when I've had something that doesn't agree, but certainly when I'm higher carb, I get more inflammation in like my joints and stuff. And when I'm in a ketogenic state, I get way less. But like right now, like going back to the original question of what I eat in a day, right now I'll only eat 2 meals in a day and can maintain the muscle that I've had for many years through just eating 2 meals a day of high protein, high fat. Whereas when I'm on a more carb-based diet, I'll want to eat like 4 or 5 meals a day and I don't feel satiated. I feel like I'm looking for that next meal. Whereas right now, like I say, I'm fasted. I can go without food quite easily for another few hours. If I'm not, if I'm having things like ketones or having MCT oil and having things that will keep my brain functioning well and electrolytes, but I'm not craving that next hit of food. I feel like satiated, which is crazy.
Yeah, and it's something we trained pretty intensely this morning as well. And there's no.
It feels like my red face, probably, that I'm like sweating up my ass.
That's fine. I was just going to say you're nervous to be here, but exactly. big name like me, But when you've got, I don't want to speak ill of carbohydrates in this sense. I think there's a place where they come absolutely
100%.
But it seems as though, for me, if I am eating carbs post-workout, there can be somewhat of a benefit if I don't plan on really using my brain a whole lot that day. It comes at a cost, right? Yeah. So I usually regulate pretty closely like what my day looks like. If I'm going to train hard and then I'm going to roll into something that's going to be cognitively demanding, in my opinion, at least for myself, it would be foolish for me to eat carbs at that time. I go into Dr. Mike Israel mentioned this too. Like, I don't think it's anything to any like significantly measurable degree in any studies really, but there is sort of a rest and digest effect that happens when you have carbs. It just kind of makes you like, no, whatever, I'm good, I'm good. You know, maybe there's a signaling pathway of some sort that just tells your body glucose is higher, we're good, we're safe, we don't need to hunt.
Yeah.
At which point you just kind of become a little more lackadaisical. So I'm not as switched on.
Totally agree. That's exactly what I feel like. And it's why I want to sit in that state more year round, to be honest, because when I first started eating healthier, like in my mid-20s, and was like kind of made a big lifestyle change, I got addicted to feeling good. That was the big part of why I wanted to do it and maintain it and just sustain it, because eating and then feeling crap is the worst thing in the world. Like, you want to eat something and be like, what's next?
Yeah.
And for me, that style of eating, high protein, high fat, I just feel sharper compared to when I'm on carbs. I notice this when I have like high carb meals, like a big Christmas dinner, for instance. When me and my wife, we make a massive Christmas feast for like about 20 people every year. And there's tons of carbs in it. But we all, after Christmas dinner, are like, just on the floor, because you've had that massive glycemic load. And I'm not used to that year round. So when I go back into that and I have that massive like dump of carbohydrates, I feel like, oh my God. But I forget that that's what I used to feel like all the time.
Yeah.
Because I was just doing it. You know, I would go and have 12 Krispy Kreme donuts in one sitting at one point in my life, and wonder why I get headaches all the time and why I feel sluggish all the time. And I never really knew why. I just thought, oh, that's normal. And then when you make the change and it was, you know, I told you, I started watching your videos, and that was like, oh my God, I got to try this thing. And that's the thing. It's like so many people, I think, are scared to, I mean, I was, it's so scary to jump out of the norm of like what you've seen as the pyramid of what you're supposed to eat, right? And it's so scary to cut out the thing that you've been told is your fuel source, and then go, you know what, this is all fine, but what about this? What about the small percentage of people that are thriving on this? Why not try it? And I think, you know, it's a testament to you, man, and other people like you that are putting the great information out there for people like me to go, okay, I have a platform here that I can follow and a protocol that I can follow to actually benefit from this. Because so many people do it wrong. I think that's where people try it and fall off. Is they start getting mad sugar cravings. They just feel sluggish because maybe they haven't got enough high enough fats or high enough ketones in their system, that they just don't feel like good. And that's where it's tricky for people, I think, to actually sustain it.
Yeah. Did it take you a while when you first kind of, I don't want to say necessarily eliminated carbs, but reduced them? Did it take you a while to transition to a place where you felt good? I mean, you had years of obviously being very glycolytic, you know, eating 12 Krispy Kreme donuts and not, you know, going into diabetic shock.
I know, right?
I mean, you clearly were established.
Close, surely close.
Was there a transition for you adapting to it, or did it actually come pretty easy for you?
It's a good question, because, you know, we talk about the keto flu and stuff like that, right? And I've actually, the most recent time I decided to go more keto again, I got it the worst I've ever had it, weirdly. And that wasn't eating any processed foods, so it was still eating whole foods and eating carbohydrates from fruits, sweet potatoes, stuff like that. But I got it worse this time around. The first time, which was in 2018, 2019, actually wasn't too bad. I actually transitioned pretty well. I think I probably had a period where I wasn't eating enough fats, because I think I remember watching one of your videos and you saying you have to keep your fats high enough to actually benefit from it. A lot of people make the mistake of not having enough fats, and they just kind of end up in very, very low carb. Yeah. And then just kind of have the same kind of brain fog they were getting on carbs, and they just go back to eating more glucose. So I feel like I transitioned pretty well. I remember that feeling, that very first feeling, where I just had this crazy mental clarity and also physical energy. Like, I wanted to just go and work out. And I remember not having any kind of like crash in the middle of my workout. I just felt like I could just maintain. The only thing I do find when transitioning to keto initially is especially for hypertrophic work, that sort of the glycogen stores of like that top end of your reps, if you're working in a 12 to 15 range, for say, I just found that I was weakening at the weights I was previously using. I was finding that I was just starting to weaken.
Yeah.
But then once you're in it long enough, I found that I just adapted and I could lift then more than what I was lifting before. Like one of the crazy benefits I've found recently is I'm hitting PBs on my strength work that I do. So say like a trap bar deadlift, I'm hitting PBs now. And I'm like, how on earth am I doing that? I've got no carbs in my system at all. But I feel great. I don't feel any kind of like sluggish crash when I'm in the middle of my training. Obviously it's still hard, right? But I feel like I'm operating at a different level, which I'm 39 now. It's great because I feel better than I did when I was like 28 eating carbs. So it's interesting, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's we call it metabolic purgatory, when you sit in this state of just enough carbs to knock you out of a ketogenic state or knock you out of that quote unquote like low carb state. You're in like a low to moderate state. You know, your body has this very clear line of delineation between when you are optimized for fat adaptation and you're really using it, or more glycolytic. Like there's not really an in between, unfortunately. It's like preferentially using one or the other. So if you think about it, if you're eating a whole lot of carbohydrates, and this isn't even any malice on eating carbohydrates, it's just the way it is. It's just sheer facts. Like if you're more glycolytic, you're going to be optimized for utilizing those carbohydrates more. If you are more fat adapted, you're going to be optimized for using those fats more. And that's still going to take time. But if you're in the middle range there, people that are in that, I call it the low carb state. But I mean, you can be low carb and not be in that state. I say it's like the danger zone of being in that like 100-ish grams of carbs a day, where it's like you're eating just enough carbs to give you a little bit of anaerobic or glycolytic energy, but not enough to actually really thrive in that state. So you're constantly dipping your toe in the water of low carb to moderate carb, and you're never thriving in one or the other.
Yeah.
So I found that people just I don't want to say pick a side, but in some ways you do sort of have to pick a side for finite periods of time. You say, okay, if I'm going to go low carb, I'm going to commit to going low carb for this 90-day period, and I'm going to stick with it, and I'm going to ride those initial waves that kind of suck. And then you realize that, wait a minute, I'm thriving on this. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what you do forever, because everything comes at a cost. Everything, no matter what side you do. Eventually you get to a point where you're like, okay, yeah, like maybe my body would thrive if I reintroduced carbs, and you do that for 90 days, and you find this pattern that works for you, because there's like sort of an enzymatic efficiency that happens. Like if you're going low carb, there's an enzymatic efficiency that takes time to ramp up. And once that enzymatic efficiency elevates, you're utilizing those fuels better. You no longer need carbohydrates because you've upregulated other processes. The same happens when you go to the higher carbohydrate side. You lower the ability to utilize the fats as effectively. So then you're like, okay, well, how do I periodize this with my training goals?
Yes.
Right? Like if you're in a fat loss phase, there was a recent study, I can't remember which study it was, what journal it was published in. We'll be able to link out to it. We'll put a note. I think it was the one that was basically looking at, bottom line is, higher carb was more beneficial slightly for building muscle. Lower carb was head and shoulders better for fat loss. It just was. And I know
is that because of the calorie deficit, or is that just because of the utilization of fat?
This was interesting because this was independent of deficit. So this was fat oxidation rates, and I mean, we'll link out to it. It's you're not going to have the traditional dietitians of the world posting this study, but it was a decent, more than a decent study. It was a good study, and it did demonstrate that fat was not only oxidized at a higher rate, it did result in slightly, and to a point what is meaningful, not just statistically significant, but also a meaningful amount of fat loss more. However, the muscle building side was slightly more beneficial with carbohydrates. So then you start saying, okay, I mean, and then this isn't something where the mainstream that just needs to lose weight needs to worry about. I want to caveat with that. If you're someone who's overweight, just like they just need to lose weight, by all means, do what's sustainable for you.
Yeah.
But if you are getting to a point where like, yes, I need to get down to 7% body fat, then you do start splitting hairs and you do start looking at this stuff.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know like how many bodybuilders, who would cut to get down to that very low. And I obviously, bodybuilders will be the first to say that it's not like healthy to go to that lower percentage of body fat, like down to 3, 2, 3, 4%.
Yeah.
Whatever utilization you use to get there. But I'd be curious to know how many are using more of a ketogenic state and using fat as a fuel source to get down to that low states, because it seems that low carb is the one that seems to be most used, right?
Most of the time. I mean, I've swam in and out of the bodybuilding circles for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good friends with, Flex Lewis, and it's, he has, what was he, 8-time or 6-time?
Yeah.
I mean, it's it's just like, and he's followed me for a long time because he's even talked about, hey, like I've been very interested in your stuff during my cuts. And it's like that community, as much as they are the freak shows and they want to be the freak shows, it's what they do works, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I take sometimes what they do with a stronger, how do I put this? I don't want to say I take it stronger than I so take the evidence in the scientific literature. But those people are willing to push the envelope and test the things. And granted, there are other things at play. There's obviously going to be drugs at play. There's things.
Yeah. And also we've got to talk about how you feel, like the performance aspect of it.
Exactly. Because they don't really care how they feel.
Yeah.
Like it's that
the
very myopic.
Is what they're chasing.
But I would say probably 60 to 70% of the bodybuilders that I know when it comes down to cutting, it's some variation of low carb or keto to get
For sure. Me too.
They cut out the carbs. So, and then when it comes time to bulk, then the carbs are back in. And it's like, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
It's
interesting because I'm sure a lot of people have thought with this of like, you go across, you're swamped with different versions of ways to lose body fat and to look good. But I really think like one thing I've learned is like, it's so important to remember what your goal is. Is your goal just feeling good? Is your goal to lose body fat to a point where you feel aesthetically pleased with yourself? Is it to be able to function at a high level at work, whatever? Is it that you don't feel sluggish after lunch? Like knowing what that is for me has been so important. And I think finding like a default setting, of where you feel content, where you feel good, you're happy with how you look. That's always been my goal recently, so I can function well with my kids. I'm not like, we've talked about this, like when you've trained so hard and you might be in like a deficit that you're reading your kid a bedtime story at night. Like I've had this where I'm like, oh my God, like I'm absolutely zapped. Yeah. And you just haven't got enough sparking up there. There's like not enough calories in there, or you've trained too hard. And I know that when I've done low carb, for too long, like I can do it for so long, my body will buffer it. And then I kind of crash out, man. Like my performance just takes a knock. Whereas with more of a ketogenic state, I know that I don't think I'm in a calorie deficit at all when I'm in, because my fats are so high. Yeah. And calorie for calorie, we know that fats are way more calorie dense than the carbs I was having. So even when I'm eating carbs, I think I'm more in a deficit than when I'm in a high fat state, for sure. But I'll stay leaner generally, eating more ketogenic. And feel sharper as well. So that's always been my goal now, is to just kind of feel good, but know that I can maintain a weight that I'm happy with kind of year round by eating the way that I do, which is, at the moment, more high fat and high protein. And
you don't have to get married to any one thing.
Absolutely.
I think that's a big piece that it's, I liken it to, people will find that a certain dietary strategy will get them through a rough point or a health crisis for themselves. And they'll become very attached to that, and they'll become very tribal about it.
Yeah, we see it a lot, right?
Yeah, right. But the body's also going to change. I mean, as your body fat levels change, as your levels of reactive oxygen species change as a result of, there's some evidence that doing, low carb keto for a very long time slowly starts to elevate reactive oxygen species to a certain level. ROS being oxidative stress, right? So the body will try to match and try to counteract that by making you more resilient, but to a certain degree, right? So then at a point, there's a tipping point. What I mean by that is a lot of times if people do very long-term keto, they do start to find, okay, after 6-8 months, maybe a year, like I'm not feeling as good as I did when I first started.
Yeah.
So they'll abandon ship, they'll eat some carbohydrates, they'll reintroduce, and they start feeling good in that again, and they start saying, okay, well, low carb was bad. That was a weird phase of my life. Can't believe I did that. Now I'm back on carbs. Yeah. And this goes on for a year or so. And then they say, oh, wait a minute. And giving yourself a little bit of grace with that rather than just abandoning certain, because there's a season for everything.
Yes.
And I also believe that epigenetically, we all respond differently, but also just because something stopped working doesn't mean that it's bad or won't work again.
100%.
You do need to rotate these things out.
Well, like we you know, the primal setting, everyone talks about primal, and you know, the carnivore folks, you know, we'll talk about it from a primal setting. But remember, you know, from a primal setting, we would find fruit and binge on it.
Yeah.
Like we would find honey and binge on it. Wouldn't be a daily staple, but we would find it, you know, seasonally, and we would just smash that stuff. So I think there is absolutely something in, like, that's what I'm trying to adopt at the moment, is like, what would be available to me primarily year round? Okay, well, meat is available. I don't know if avocados would have been, but but since they're available in the shop, I'll have them anyway. But I'm thinking, well, meat, it was something that, you know, if you were hunting it down, you would find it on a regular basis. So we might have to survive on just meat for a long time. But then seasonally, fruit's available now. Let's go have some fruit. So we would binge on that, take it all in for maybe a period of time, and then we'd have to go back into just having meat again. So I'm trying to sort of work it, like, rather than, like you say, pick a camp, stick with it. There are obviously positives and negatives to staying in anything long term, too much of anything long term, without. So it's like Paul Saladino, right? Like, he was so strict carnivore, and then now he's like switched into more of like animal based, introducing fruit and honey and all this. But he has that as I think raw dairy as well, right? Which, of course, we all know all of these things have their benefits. But he's now doing that as a staple year round. And I wonder how long he'll do that for before he might be like, oh, maybe I need to utilize it for, you know, every now and again, as opposed to daily staples, because we wouldn't have honey available to us every day. We wouldn't have fruit year round. So I'm just like intrigued by it, you know, like I'm always interested in experimenting with my own body of what feels right and what. But I always just try and go, what would I have naturally? Because we're so plagued with what's just readily available all the time, and what should be, what we think in our own heads, what should be right for us. But there is no right or wrong year round. We don't know what that is. We can just go what feels right for us, and genetically what feels right for us. You know, trial and error is a wonderful thing, I think.
I agree, and I feel like we've lost some of the ability to determine or ascertain what we need to eat at a given point in time, because I don't want to, you know, say our taste buds are hijacked. It's a very kind of geeky way of saying it.
You're not far wrong there, man.
We don't really know what we inherently need at a certain time, right? You know, you say trust your gut, and I think that if your level of awareness is heightened and you really are in tune with your body, you can listen to that. You can listen to that. People that really are, I don't want to say obsessed, but to a certain degree obsessed, but also just live this way, you can tell. You can tell, like, you know what? Dang, like, there's a big bucket of honey right there. And yes, like, this isn't my brain talking. This is my body talking. I could get some benefit from that. Or, you know, if it's one of these things that's designed for us to have in abundance at one point in time, then maybe I would also imagine that we would have more self-control and more ability to determine what we need to eat and how much of it we need to eat. If we came across a beehive, I don't know. Who knows what we'd actually do? Are they going to eat the whole hive? Is the whole hive going to be, the whole honeycomb going to be distributed amongst 20 people, and you're actually only getting 200 grams of carbs and really not that much? But is that happening day in and day out and day in and day out? Probably not. But when you look at the level of awareness, unfortunately, just because of all the hyperpalatable foods that we have, like, I don't think people really know when they need to eat what.
So true.
It's just the brain talking. It's just the dopamine hit.
Yeah. And especially with things, you know, that like are so highly processed now and are hyperpalatable, people will just go and go and go on that stuff, you know. And but I know, like, even when I have honey now, it's so good. Like everything about my body's like more like eat that whole jar. And when you put it into a setting, when that's put into packaged food that's like so cheap and accessible, no wonder we have a problem with obesity and stuff, because people will just binge on that stuff all day long. I know, I've been there. I used to do it. There's a reason I did 12 Krispy Kremes because I wanted the next one, and it's just so addictive.
What was your body composition like then? I mean, were you still pretty lean? Because I mean, people can eat that stuff and still look fine.
Yeah, right? I mean, I was still fairly active, right? So like I was playing a lot of sports, I was still playing rugby, I was playing football, you know, probably 3-4 times a week, rugby training twice a week, and then going to the gym as well. So I was at a pretty high activity level. but I was probably sitting at like 14-15% body fat at that point. Yeah. But like I was bigger because I was still playing rugby and stuff, so I wanted to, be stronger, and I would lift much heavier weights than I do now.
Yeah, and it's like, if you liked how you felt at that point, it'd be one thing, right? And it's like, just because you can
Totally.
doesn't mean you should. And I think that's kind of the thought process here. It's
Yeah.
like, yes, you can get shredded eating donuts. Of course you can.
Yeah.
Of course you can. Like, there's still a thermodynamic equation there. Like,
Yeah.
you're flat out. No one's denying that. Maybe there are some people. You can absolutely get shredded eating donuts and protein shakes,
Yeah.
for sure. But then you ask yourself, how do you really feel, and how's your recovery? And so I'll ask you. What's your opinion? Just I like to ask this. On nutrient density versus just calories. I know you and I are both aligned in the sense that obviously calories have a place, calories matter, but where do you think nutrient density comes into play with this?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Again, it's like, I think we never know until it's the trial and error thing again. But I do find that when I chase nutrients over calories, I feel better and I get better results. I feel almost like if I feel good, then like things like my cortisol levels will be lower as well. Like if I'm just chasing nutrients, if I can have just a few berries, an avocado, and like 2 grass-fed beef burgers, and I kind of look at that meal, and I think we talked about this. Like it feels that it's probably not enough, like calories wise, like that's not enough. But I eat it, I feel satiated, I have good energy, I have good mental clarity, I can maintain my weight. So I'm going, well, from an anecdotal point of view, I kind of go, well, it seems to be working. So I suppose, like for me, like the turn to chasing nutrients over checking my macros all the time, which also is really stressful. Like tracking macros, like I know like bodybuilders do it, and people say like that's what you got to do. I think for certain people, like it's really helpful to start tracking macros if you are overweight and you want to know what your calorie burn is per day, and you want to definitely know you're in a deficit. I think it's really beneficial to start doing that, to have an idea of where to sit and what your plate should look like. But after a while, you really, for me, going on a feeling of like just feeling satiated and chasing the nutrients is way more conducive to like long-term benefit, I think, and weight maintenance.
Let's pivot just for a little bit and talk. We don't usually talk training on this channel a whole lot, but since I've trained with you, I know that you have more than just the physique. You have the fitness too. I'm curious, like, what does your weekly split sort of look like? Maybe when you're training to be Luther versus off season. Yeah.
So at home, I have a home gym, and I have similar kits where you have here, like a row. I have a whole rig. I have a ski erg, assault bike, and I have like ropes, and I have my garden. So it's much more like Metcon based, I would say, when I'm at home, and I like to try and get something short and sharp in before the kids wake up. So I get up very early and train like that. So my weekly split would probably be like 3 times a week I would do some kind of Metcon, like we called it IWT, like interval weight training. Mm. So you would do, let's say, like German volume training style, right? 10 sets of, if it was a lower body day, I'll do 10 sets of a front squat, a superset with a row and like some ropes or something, right? And then I might do 2 different circuits like that. Very similar sort of workout to what we did today. So that for me is like short, it's intensity high, but I also get some volume in there for hypertrophy work. When I'm training during a shoot, it's much more kind of traditional bodybuilder split because my hours are so crazy. I find that when I'm doing too many Metcons, really, really high intensity stuff, I'll burn out. Like it's very, very hard to maintain that level of intensity. But so I'll maybe do like 1 or 2 like that a week, but most of the time, especially because we often train as a group as well. So we might do like, an upper body split, lower body split, and then like 2 kind of circuit type sessions a week. But I'll still train, in some format. I'll train like 6 days a week generally and take 1 rest day, but some of those sessions are more intense than others. So I find that some of those days are almost like active rest days or just getting some blood pumping in the muscle, especially if we're on a night shoot. When I do, we've worked out before after I've been on a week of night shoots and it drains you big time. But to try and maintain a physique during those night shoots is tough, because you got to get in there. But for me, those days are to go, you know what, let's just get the body moving, let's get some blood pumping in the muscle and do some light hypertrophy work. I actually find that blood flow restriction training is really beneficial on those days. You're not straining the joints too much. It's easy on the central nervous system, and you just get some good blood pumping in the muscle. But the most important thing during night shoots is nutrition, because your cortisol levels are through the roof. So eating properly and maintaining fasting is very important on those days. You actually taught me that, about how the benefits of fasting when you had lack of sleep is quite beneficial. So I utilize that a lot, and then just train to how I feel. And this bad boy, my Whoop, has been quite helpful with that.
Yeah, it's the evidence on, well, it's only in rodents, but basically when you're sleep deprived, being more fat adapted supposedly promotes more wakefulness, right? The PPAR alpha, which is basically the nuclear receptor protein that activates more when you're in a fat adapted and more lower carb fasted state, in rodents promotes more wakefulness, right? They can get by with less sleep. But more importantly, it's about, if you have to go on night shoots for X amount of time and then you know you've got to go back, it's different if you're someone that is working nights for a year, right? It's a little bit different because you've got a level of acclimation that comes to that. But if you're going, okay, I'm going to be on nights for the next 3 weeks, and you know eventually you're going to go back, you know that this is an anomaly. It's like, hey, perhaps you should probably be feeding when there's still daylight cues coming in, and fasting during the dark hours, so that it's easier for you to transition back. That way you're not giving yourself these cues that you're awake. It's just going to make it a little bit easier for you to just transition. It makes a very big difference, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still an extremely, extremely stressful situation.
It is, and I really struggle on night shoots for the sake that I don't get enough sleep. I just can't sleep through the day. For whatever reason, it takes me a long, long time to actually adapt to sleeping through the day and then getting up at like 1, 2 in the afternoon and then shooting again. I usually wake up, we might finish at like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. I'll be awake by 9:30, so I'm functioning on much lower sleep. So the fasting, like feeling sharper and being able to get through a night shoot is vital. If I get that kind of sluggish feeling like halfway through the night, that's not good. I need to be sharp. And like you talk about recall and stuff, right? When you're actually trying to act and like you're in a high stakes situation, you're in an action sequence, or you've got a big monologue that you've got to remember. On like 3-4 hours sleep, it's tough. So you've got to do and utilize everything you have available to you to stay sharp.
Yeah. Well, man, where can everyone find you?
So I'm on Instagram, Tom Hopper Hops. That's the only social media platform I'm on. So and everything's on there. I talk about my kids on there. I talk about my training and how I eat and stuff. And so they can find me on there.
Season 5 Umbrella Academy out
Season
now.
4, yeah.
Season 4, sorry.
Yeah, Season 4. Yeah, so, feels like 5. We've been doing it for 7 years. So it feels like 5. But yeah, Season 4 out now, yeah.
Right on, man. Well, thanks, brother.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. It's great.